In this video, I'm going to be showing you what it takes to make $10,000 a year with covered calls. If you're new to covered calls or selling options, make sure to check out the videos in the description. Now let's go ahead and jump right into it. So we want to see what it takes to make $10,000 per year with covered calls. There are 52 weeks in a year, but we'll pretend 2 weeks are vacation or non-trading weeks, so we'll use 50 weeks for our calculation. That means you need to make $10,000 divided by 50 weeks, which is $200 per week for the whole year. Now let's go ahead and jump into the Thinkorswim platform so we can see what this would take with real covered calls. For this video, I'm going to be looking at 2 different stocks so we can see how much it takes depending on the stock you're using. I'm going to be looking at QQQ, which is an ETF that tracks the NASDAQ 100. So that means it basically is a basket of 100 stocks that include stocks like Microsoft, Apple, Costco, and a bunch more. And I'll also be looking at how much this would take if we traded covered calls on an individual stock like Apple stock. If you want to see this same analysis on different stocks, let me know in the comments. So how much money you need in order to make $200 per week with covered calls also depends on how much risk you're willing to take. And in this scenario, we're going to be defining risk as the likelihood that your shares get assigned and then you have to sell them at a certain strike price. Also, I'm only going to be looking at call options that are expiring the following Friday or about 1 week because we're trying to make $200 per week. And this is also assuming you never get assigned when selling covered calls. In a real scenario, you may get assigned and then have to switch to selling cash secured puts or some version of the wheel strategy. Now let's go ahead and jump into the trade tab and see what this would look like. We're going to start with QQQ and I'm going to be looking at the options that are about 7 days out. For a covered call, the basic idea is that you own shares of the stock, or in this case the ETF, and then you sell call options. Typically, you need to have 100 shares for every 1 call option that you sell. So in this first risk scenario, we're going to look at where you would need to sell in order to make about $100. So looks like you need to sell the 443 call option strike price to make $110. So if you wanted to make $200, which is our goal per week, you would need to sell 2 option contracts at this strike price, and that would be about $220 in 1 week. But in order to sell 2 option contracts, you would need 200 shares of the stock. So that means you would need to buy 200 shares, which would cost you 200 times the current stock price, which is 436.55, or $87,310. This is how much you would need in order to buy 200 shares so that you can then sell 2 option contracts at this strike price and make $220 in 7 days. And because this is slightly further away from the current stock price, there is a lower chance of you getting assigned and then having to sell your shares. Whereas if you had sold closer, it would be different. The next example we're going to look at is actually selling a call option that is closer to the current price. So if you wanted to make $200 per week, you could also sell 1 option contract at about the 440 strike price and collect $197, almost $200. And in this case, you only need to sell 1 call option, so you only need 100 shares of the current stock. So in this scenario, it would cost you 100 times the current stock price, 436.55, or $43,655, half of what you needed before in order to make the $200 per week. But in this case, you do have a higher chance of getting assigned, and that would most likely occur if this stock price ends up closing above this strike price that we see here, and then your shares get assigned and you are forced to sell your shares at that price. If that happens, you could then switch to selling cash secured puts, which is basically what the wheel strategy is. But this was an example of 2 different call options you could sell on QQQ in order to make $200 per week, and how many shares you would need at each of those different strike prices to make that $200. Now let's go ahead and look at Apple stock and see what it would look like on that one. In this scenario, I'm going to be looking at the 10 days out options just because those are the closest to the weekly options. And again, let's start by seeing what strike price you could make about $100 at. And in this case, it looks like you could sell the $185 call options and make about $110. So you would need to sell 2 option contracts at this strike price in order to make about $200. And again, in this case, if you're selling 2 option contracts, you would need 200 shares of the stock. So we can calculate how much that would cost you. So we're going to go ahead and do 200 times the current stock price, which is 181.16. So you would need $36,232 in order to buy 200 shares so that you could then sell 2 option contracts at this strike price and make $200 per week. If you wanted to, you could also sell the 1 option contract at a closer strike price, so the 182.5 call option strike price, and make about $200. And because now you're only selling 1 option contract, you only need 100 shares of the stock. So in this case, it would cost you 100 times the current stock price, 181.16, or $18,116 in order to sell the covered call and make about $200 in 1 week. This strike price is extremely close to the current stock price, so you do have a much higher chance of getting a sign and then having to sell your shares at the strike price. And then again, most likely in a real life scenario, switching over to selling cash secured puts or some form of the wheel strategy. If you enjoyed this video, or if you have any questions, comments, or suggestions and want to see this same analysis on other stocks, feel free to leave those down below in the comments. And if you want to help support the channel, then don't forget to like and subscribe, and I'll see you all in the next one.